Dr. Sarah Chen had always been meticulous in her research, but the patterns she discovered in the global vaccination data kept her awake for weeks. As a senior epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control, she had access to databases that most researchers could only dream of. What started as routine analysis of vaccination effectiveness had evolved into something far more disturbing than she'd ever imagined. The initial anomalies appeared innocent enough: slight variations in reported side effects across different regions, inconsistencies in batch numbers that didn't align with manufacturing records, and mortality rates that fluctuated in ways that defied statistical probability. Sarah had spent 15 years studying disease patterns, and her instincts told her these weren't random coincidences. Her first breakthrough came when she cross-referenced vaccination sites with subsequent emergency room visits. The correlation was subtle, but unmistakable. Certain vaccination centers consistently showed higher rates of neurological symptoms in patients who received vaccines from specific batch numbers. When she attempted to access the detailed composition data for these batches, she encountered security clearances she'd never seen before in her career. The late nights in her office became obsessive. Sarah's husband, Mark, barely saw her anymore as she dove deeper into the data. Her supervisor, Dr. Robert Harrison, had begun asking pointed questions about her current projects, suggesting she focus on more conventional research priorities. But Sarah couldn't let go of what she was discovering. The breakthrough moment came when she realized the pattern wasn't random at all. The affected vaccination sites formed a geographic network that corresponded almost perfectly with major population centers, transportation hubs, and, most chillingly, locations near military installations and government facilities. Someone had been conducting a carefully planned experiment on the American population, and the official vaccine rollout had been the perfect cover. That night, as Sarah sat in her empty office staring at maps covered in red pins marking affected areas, she realized she was no longer just a researcher uncovering data. She had become a witness to something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. The encrypted files Sarah discovered buried in the CDC's classified database changed everything she thought she knew about the global pandemic response. These weren't the standard reports she was accustomed to reviewing. They were detailed communications between government agencies she'd never heard of, pharmaceutical executives, and officials from organizations with names that sounded more like science fiction than reality. Project Nexus was the code name that appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. The files revealed a multi-phase operation that had been in development for over a by people with resources and reach beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Chapter 3. The Watchers. Sarah's first indication that she was being monitored came on a Tuesday morning when she noticed the same black sedan parked across from her house for the third consecutive day. The vehicle had tinted windows and government plates, though the occupants tried to maintain the pretense of inconspicuous surveillance. Her paranoia, which had been building for weeks, suddenly felt entirely justified. At work, colleagues who had previously been friendly began avoiding her. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms, and meetings she'd normally be included in were scheduled without her knowledge. Dr. Harrison called her into his office with increasing frequency, asking seemingly casual questions about her research interests and suggesting she take some vacation time to recharge and refocus. The digital surveillance was more sophisticated than the physical presence. Sarah's computer access began experiencing mysterious glitches, files that wouldn't open, databases that showed error messages, and documents that disappeared from her secure folders. Her home internet connection became unreliable, with certain websites taking forever to load, while others were completely inaccessible. She started receiving phone calls with no one on the other end, hang-ups that occurred at specific times throughout the day. Her cell phone battery began draining unusually quickly, and she noticed apps running in the background that she'd never installed. The technology they were using to monitor her was clearly more advanced than standard government surveillance equipment. The psychological pressure was deliberate and calculated. Sarah found herself questioning her own observations, wondering if the patterns she'd discovered were real or products of an increasingly paranoid mind. The isolation was particularly effective. She couldn't discuss her research with colleagues, and bringing Mark into the situation would put him in danger. The message was clear: abandon the investigation or face escalating consequences. But Sarah had seen too much to simply walk away. The evidence she'd gathered was too compelling, and the implications were too serious to ignore. She began making copies of everything, hiding documents in locations where even sophisticated surveillance couldn't reach them. That evening, as she drove home from work, Sarah noticed the black sedan following at a discreet distance. For the first time since beginning her investigation, she felt genuinely afraid for her life. The people behind Project Nexus clearly had resources and determination that matched the scope of their ambitions. Chapter 4. The Ally. Dr. Michael Torres had been Sarah's mentor during her graduate studies at Johns Hopkins, and their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared dedication to scientific integrity. When Sarah reached out to him through an encrypted messaging app she'd never used before, Michael immediately recognized the seriousness of her situation. Michael worked as a consultant for various government agencies, which gave him access to information networks that most researchers never encountered. His security clearance was higher than Sarah's, and his connections within the intelligence community had taught him to recognize when legitimate research had stumbled into dangerous territory. Sarah's cautious inquiries about nanotechnology and electromagnetic frequency human neural networks so seamlessly that they would be virtually undetectable even with advanced medical imaging. The programming capabilities were sophisticated enough to modify everything from basic motor functions to complex emotional responses. This isn't just about population control, Michael explained as they reviewed activation protocols. They're trying to create a new form of human consciousness, one that can be programmed and controlled remotely. The implications go far beyond anything we've seen in science fiction. The realization that such technology actually existed and was being deployed on a global scale left both researchers struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they discovered. Michael agreed to help Sarah gather additional evidence, but warned her that their investigation had already attracted attention from people who would view them as threats to be eliminated rather than problems to be managed. Chapter 5. The Network. Michael's contacts within the intelligence community provided access to information that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy Sarah had uncovered. Project Nexus wasn't an isolated American operation. It was part of a global network involving governments, corporations, and organizations from every major nation. The coordination required for such an undertaking suggested planning that had been decades in the making. The network's structure was compartmentalized in ways that made traditional investigation nearly impossible. Each participating organization knew only their specific role in the larger operation, with coordination handled by a small group of individuals who remained anonymous even to most participants. The funding came from sources so diverse and carefully laundered that tracking the money trail would require resources that only nations possessed. Through Michael's contacts, they learned that similar vaccination programs were being implemented worldwide, each adapted to local populations and government structures. The nanotechnology was being manufactured in facilities across multiple continents, with different components produced in different locations to prevent any single site from possessing complete information about the device's capabilities. The electromagnetic activation systems were equally distributed, disguised as upgrades to cellular networks, Wi-Fi infrastructure, and even smart appliances. The 5G network expansion that had occurred during the pandemic wasn't just about improved communications. It was about creating the transmission infrastructure necessary to activate and control the nanotechnology that had been distributed through the vaccines. Sarah and Michael discovered that certain individuals had been excluded from receiving the active nanotechnology, creating a protected class that included high-level government officials, wealthy elites, and their families. These individuals received special vaccine formulations Friends and family attributed them to stress or normal aging, but the monitoring data showed clear evidence of technological intervention. More disturbing were the reports on subjects who had experienced activation events during testing phases. Subject 8829, a construction worker from Detroit, had been exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies that triggered acute neurological responses. The reports described how external signals could induce everything from mild disorientation to complete motor control, with the subject remaining conscious but unable to control his actions. The documentation revealed that researchers had been experimenting with different activation protocols to achieve various levels of control. Some frequencies could influence emotional states, making subjects more susceptible to suggestion or more likely to adopt specific viewpoints. Other protocols could override cognitive functions, effectively allowing remote control of human behavior while maintaining the appearance of voluntary action. Sarah felt sick reading about subjects who had been used to test termination protocols. The nanotechnology included fail-safe mechanisms that could shut down vital biological functions, essentially providing a remote kill switch for anyone who had received the active formulations. The tests were conducted on individuals deemed expendable by the project administrators, including homeless people, prisoners, and patients in psychiatric facilities. Perhaps most chilling were the reports on mass activation experiments. Entire communities had been exposed to broadcast signals designed to test the technology's effectiveness on large populations simultaneously. The results showed that properly implemented protocols could influence the behavior of thousands of people at once, creating the potential for social control on an unprecedented scale. Michael's analysis of the technical data confirmed that the technology was advancing rapidly. The latest nanotechnology versions were smaller, more sophisticated, and capable of self-replication within the human body. Once activated, the devices could reproduce themselves using biological materials, ensuring permanent integration with the host's nervous system. Chapter 7. The opposition. Sarah and Michael's investigation had attracted the attention of a small but dedicated group of researchers, journalists, and activists who had been tracking similar anomalies across different fields. This informal network of individuals had been sharing information through encrypted channels, each contributing pieces to a puzzle none of them had been able to complete alone. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a neuroscientist at MIT, had been studying unexplained neurological symptoms in post-vaccination patients. Her research had been shut down by university administrators after she published preliminary findings suggesting external technological interference with brain function. Marcus deliberate. Despite the risks, the group continued gathering evidence and developing strategies to expose the conspiracy. They understood that traditional channels, media, law enforcement, elected officials, were either compromised or powerless against an operation of this magnitude. Their only hope was to gather irrefutable evidence and release it simultaneously through multiple channels, making suppression impossible. As their investigation progressed, they realized they were racing against time. The acceleration of implementation phases meant that within months, the technology would be activated in populations large enough to make resistance practically impossible. Chapter 8. The Breakthrough. The breakthrough in understanding Project Nexus came when Elena managed to intercept communications between activation sites during a test operation. Using her NSA training and custom-built monitoring equipment, she had identified the specific frequencies being used to communicate with the nanotechnology and developed methods to decode the control signals. The intercepted data revealed that the activation network was far more extensive than they had previously understood. Transmission sites were embedded in virtually every aspect of modern infrastructure: cell towers, Wi-Fi routers, smart meters, even LED lighting systems. The entire technological environment had been weaponized to serve as a control mechanism for the modified population. Sarah's analysis of the control protocols showed that the system was designed to be imperceptible to the affected individuals. The nanotechnology could influence thoughts and emotions so subtly that subjects would believe their modified responses were their own natural reactions. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated enough to make people defend the very system that was controlling them. Michael's examination of the biological integration data revealed that the nanotechnology was designed to become increasingly sophisticated over time. The devices could learn from their hosts' neural patterns, developing more effective methods of control based on individual psychology and behavior. Long-term exposure would result in progressively deeper integration, eventually making removal impossible even with advanced medical intervention. The group discovered that certain individuals appeared to have natural resistance to the nanotechnology. Genetic factors, existing medical conditions, or even lifestyle choices seemed to interfere with the device's ability to integrate properly with neural networks. These resistant individuals were being identified and monitored, with plans for secondary intervention protocols that would overcome their natural immunity. Perhaps most significantly, they learned that the project's ultimate goal wasn't just population control. used her CDC credentials to access additional biological research data, focusing on long-term studies that tracked health outcomes in vaccinated populations. And the systematic subversion of democratic institutions. The challenge was presenting this evidence in a way that would be credible to a public that had been conditioned to dismiss such revelations as conspiracy theories. As they prepared to release their findings, the team understood that they were taking enormous personal risks. The people behind Project Nexus had demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats, and exposing the conspiracy would make them all priority targets for elimination. Chapter 10. The resistance word of Sarah's team's discoveries had spread through underground networks of researchers, activists, and concerned citizens who had been monitoring similar anomalies across different sectors. What emerged was a global resistance movement that included individuals from every profession and background, united by the understanding that they were facing an existential threat to human freedom. The resistance operated through decentralized cells that communicated using secure protocols developed by former intelligence operatives who had joined the movement. Each cell had access to only the information necessary for their specific operations, preventing any single breach from compromising the entire network. The structure was deliberately designed to be resilient against the sophisticated surveillance and infiltration capabilities of their opponents. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, a molecular biologist in Cairo, had developed potential countermeasures to the nanotechnology based on Sarah's technical specifications. His research suggested that certain compounds could interfere with the device's ability to integrate with neural tissue, potentially offering protection for individuals who hadn't yet been fully modified. The challenge was producing and distributing these countermeasures without alerting the project administrators. Captain Lisa Morrison, a former Air Force intelligence officer, had identified military personnel who were aware of the project and opposed to its implementation. These individuals provided crucial intelligence about security protocols and operational timelines, while also working to sabotage critical systems from within. The military resistance was particularly valuable because it included people with access to advanced technology and weapons systems, Tech entrepreneur David Kim had used his resources to create alternative communication networks that couldn't be monitored or shut down by government agencies. His mesh networking technology allowed resistance members to communicate even when traditional internet and cellular systems were compromised. The network was expanding globally, providing secure communications for resistance operations on every continent. The resistance faced enormous challenges in coordinating their efforts while avoiding detection. Every communication was potentially monitored. Every meeting could be infiltrated, and every operation risked exposure that could lead to the arrest or elimination of the symptoms to stress-related conditions and seasonal mood disorders. The cover story was sophisticated and plausible, designed to deflect attention from the technological cause of the symptoms while providing explanations that satisfied medical professionals who weren't aware of the true situation. Michael's analysis of the activation data revealed that the technology was being tested in phases, with different populations receiving different levels of control signals. Some areas experienced mild behavioral modification designed to increase compliance with government recommendations. Other regions received stronger signals that could override individual decision-making processes during specific time periods. The resistance network in the affected areas provided crucial real-time intelligence about the activation's effects. Resistance members who had natural immunity or had taken countermeasures developed by Dr. Hassan were able to observe and document the behavioral changes in their communities without being affected themselves. Their reports painted a disturbing picture of entire populations becoming increasingly passive and compliant. Perhaps most alarming were reports of activated individuals who seemed to lose interest in activities and relationships that had previously been important to them. Parents became less protective of their children, workers became more accepting of exploitative employment conditions, and citizens showed decreased interest in political participation or social activism. The activation was designed to be gradual and subtle, avoiding the kind of dramatic changes that would alert unaffected individuals to the technological manipulation. The modifications were implemented slowly enough that friends and family members attributed the changes to natural causes like aging, stress, or changing life circumstances. Elena's technical analysis revealed that the activation signals were becoming more sophisticated with each test, incorporating feedback from the nanotechnology to optimize control protocols for specific populations and individuals. The system was learning and adapting, becoming more effective at achieving behavioral modification while remaining undetectable. Chapter 12. The global rollout intelligence gathered by the resistance revealed that the Pacific Northwest activation had been a successful test run for global implementation. Similar operations were being prepared for major population centers worldwide, with coordination between government agencies, telecommunications companies, and healthcare systems that demonstrated the project's truly international scope. The rollout strategy was sophisticated and multifaceted. In developed nations, activation would be gradual and disguised as upgrades to existing infrastructure. Developing countries would experience more rapid implementation, justified needed to be carefully calibrated and sustained for specific durations, but the technology was within reach of competent engineers. The resistance network mobilized rapidly to test and implement the overload strategy. Dr. Hassan coordinated medical testing in regions where activation had already occurred, confirming that the frequency treatment could reverse the behavioral modifications in affected individuals. The results were dramatic. People who had been compliant and passive for months suddenly regained their normal decision-making capabilities and awareness of their situation. However, the treatment also revealed the true scope of the conspiracy to the affected individuals. People who underwent the overload process suddenly understood that they had been controlled, manipulated, and experimented upon without their knowledge or consent. The psychological impact was severe, with many experiencing trauma, rage, and despair as they comprehended what had been done to them. Marcus began documenting the stories of overload survivors, gathering testimonials that provided undeniable evidence of the technological control system. These personal accounts, combined with medical evidence of the nanotechnology's presence, created a body of proof that would be difficult for authorities to dismiss or suppress. The resistance faced a new challenge: how to treat millions of affected individuals while avoiding detection by the project administrators. Large-scale frequency broadcasts would certainly be noticed and could provoke violent retaliation from security forces. The treatment had to be implemented carefully and gradually to avoid triggering countermeasures that could make future intervention impossible. Sarah's team realized they had found the key to defeating Project Nexus, but using it effectively would require coordination, courage, and sacrifice on a scale that would test the limits of human determination and ingenuity. Chapter 14: The Counterstrike. The Resistance launched Operation Liberation on a carefully chosen date when multiple factors aligned to maximize their chances of success. Elena had identified a vulnerability in the project's communication systems during a planned infrastructure upgrade that would temporarily reduce their monitoring capabilities. Captain Morrison's military contacts provided intelligence about security force deployment patterns that created windows of opportunity for coordinated action. The operation involved simultaneous frequency broadcasts from hundreds of locations worldwide, each targeting specific population centers that had been subjected to nanotechnology activation. The broadcasts were timed to occur during peak population density periods, rush hours, lunch breaks, and evening entertainment times to reach the maximum number of affected individuals simultaneously. David Kim's alternative communication network allowed resistance cells to coordinate their actions. terrorist attacks on public health infrastructure. The narrative battle was fierce, with official media portraying the resistance as dangerous extremists, while independent sources documented the evidence of technological control that was emerging from liberated populations. Sarah watched the global situation unfold from a secure location, knowing that the resistance had succeeded in exposing the conspiracy, but uncertain whether they could maintain their advantage long enough to achieve complete liberation. Chapter 15. The War Begins. The declaration of martial law marked the beginning of open warfare between the resistance and the forces behind Project Nexus. What had been a covert battle for information and evidence became an armed conflict for control of human consciousness, with the future of the species hanging in the balance. Government forces moved quickly to secure frequency generation facilities and arrest known resistance leaders, but the decentralized nature of the movement made complete suppression impossible. For every cell that was neutralized, 3 more emerged from previously unknown networks of concerned citizens who had been awakened by the liberation broadcasts. The propaganda war was equally intense. Official media outlets, many of whose personnel had been affected by the nanotechnology, broadcast carefully crafted narratives that portrayed the resistance as dangerous terrorists who were threatening public health and safety. The liberation process was characterized as a form of biological terrorism that was causing widespread mental illness and social breakdown. However, independent media sources and social networks controlled by resistance sympathizers were spreading evidence of the technological control system faster than it could be suppressed. Videos of nanotechnology being extracted from brain tissue, testimonials from liberated individuals, and documentation of the conspiracy were reaching audiences worldwide, despite attempts to censor the information. Captain Morrison's military contacts revealed that the armed forces were splitting along lines that reflected their exposure to the nanotechnology. Units that had received the active formulations remained loyal to the project administrators and were being used to suppress resistance activities. Military personnel who had been excluded from the modification program or who had natural immunity were increasingly likely to defect to the resistance. The technological battlefield was equally complex. Elena's team was engaged in constant electronic warfare with government cyber specialists, fighting to maintain communication networks while disrupting the project's control infrastructure. Every frequency broadcast triggered countermeasures designed to prevent future liberation attempts, forcing continuous innovation in resistance technology. International dynamics added another layer of complexity to the conflict. for months or years. Jennifer's research into the long-term effects of nanotechnology exposure revealed that some individuals had suffered permanent neurological damage that couldn't be reversed by frequency treatment. These people required ongoing medical care and rehabilitation, creating additional challenges for underground communities that were already struggling with limited resources. Elena worked to establish secure communication networks between underground settlements, using a combination of traditional radio technology and innovative quantum encryption methods that were resistant to government monitoring. The networks allowed resistance communities to share resources, coordinate operations, and maintain morale despite the isolation and constant threat of discovery. The underground also became a refuge for children whose parents had been affected by the nanotechnology. These young people, many of whom had natural immunity to the control technology, represented the future of human freedom and received specialized education designed to prepare them for leadership roles in a post-liberation society. David Kim's technological expertise proved invaluable in developing manufacturing capabilities for essential resistance equipment. Hidden workshops produced everything from frequency generation devices to medical equipment needed for treating liberated individuals. The underground economy that emerged was based on cooperation and